All right, and we are live. Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. Hope you're all doing well. Welcome to another live stream. We've got a lot to talk about today because there's a tremendous amount of risk right now regarding the global geopolitical climate. There are some more obvious risks here, and there are some which are perhaps not so obvious, but nonetheless, we have to pay attention to these because despite what you may hear from the mainstream media and from the powers that be, everything is not all right here, and the risk level is incredible, and there will be implications for the global economy, for the dollar, and ultimately for the precious metals as well. After all, this is a silver and gold channel, but of course, silver and gold are kind of intertwined with events around the globe, especially considering the way the global monetary system is structured, and so we're going to get into all of that today. First of all, let's take a look at the silver market. What's going on here? We've got both gold and silver today taking a little bit of a haircut. And you might notice here also that we've got a little bit of a new format going on for the live stream. I've got this kind of picture-in-picture thing here, but I wanted to have the map pulled up because we're going to be talking about some of the geography and some of the players here, and I think having a map as a visual is helpful. So if you're wondering why that's up, that's why. We're going to zoom in on some of these trouble spots and give you an idea what's going on right now. But silver taking a little bit of a breather, although it's still hanging on to most of its gains from Friday. Same story with gold. So markets across the board in the green today. Commodities, gold, silver, crude oil, all slightly negative. 10-year yield rising. That's the situation we have in terms of the metals. Of course, when you look at all the risk that's going on right now, and specifically we're going to address some of the threats to the petrodollar system, which I think is very important and we need to address because this system just got a lot shakier. This will ultimately have an effect on the purchasing power of the dollar. And, right now I think some of the strength that we're seeing in the dollar and U.S. treasuries and debt is a bit of an illusion, and I'm going to tell you why. If you do want to stack some silver to hedge against inflation, to hedge against some of this risk, check out sdbullion.com. Right now, new customers can get gold or silver at spot by visiting sdbullion.com/new. If you want to support this channel, one of the best ways you can do that is to support our sponsors. Now, let's get into some of the news because there's a lot to cover here, and it's pretty incredible. I'm going to try to, condense this as much as possible and put together the narrative for you here. This is an image of the U.S. naval major deployments here from USNI News. You can see we got the Gerald R. Ford there, sitting in the Eastern Mediterranean, ready to intervene in this conflict should that become necessary. And when you examine some of what we're going to take a look at today, it's becoming increasingly likely that that will be the case, or so it seems. We also have the Dwight D. Eisenhower here just off the east coast of the U.S., but that will be arriving in this theater in the next week or so to provide additional support. That's how serious this crisis is, that one carrier strike group does not seem to be enough to deal with whatever the U.S. expects might be around the corner. So that gives you an idea of what kind of escalation they may be expecting. Now let's go to the latest update here regarding an escalation on the northern border of Israel. This is the real threat at this point. If the Hezbollah militant groups in Lebanon and also in Syria, and let's go ahead and zoom in the map here a little bit so you can get some idea of the geography here. So Hezbollah is a Shiite militant group that operates primarily out of Lebanon, but also they have a presence in Syria ever since the Syrian civil war that's been going on for a decade now. They have a presence there, and interestingly, Israel has threatened to basically impose their will on Lebanon should Hezbollah get involved. I mean, they've threatened that they'll destroy Lebanon just like they're destroying the Gaza Strip at the moment. So, that is a valid threat, and the difference between Hamas, the group operating in the Gaza Strip here, which, is responsible for the attacks over the past weekend, and Hezbollah, the militant group which operates out of Lebanon and Syria, shouldn't be understated. Hezbollah is a much more effective fighting force than Hamas, and so if they get drawn in, it really will be a massive escalation, not just in terms of the volume of soldiers, but also the sophistication of the fighting force. It's much closer to a peer of the IDF than Hamas is. And so that would represent a significant escalation. And right now, Hezbollah is destroying surveillance cameras along the Lebanese border as tensions soar. That's the latest from AP. This is updated just a few hours ago. And, this is certainly a troubling sign. One of the ways that Hamas conducted their operation over the past weekend, the terrorist operation, was that they flew drones in and they disabled remotely operated guns, they disabled security devices, they disabled cell towers and communications. So when you start seeing the surveillance of the border disabled, it has to make you wonder, what does Hezbollah have planned? Is this preemptive, or is this a setup for a larger incursion? And that will be a real problem for the IDF if they get to fight a second front here. That could really be a problem. That was actually one of the things that allowed the Hamas fighters to operate so freely this past weekend, is that many of the soldiers who had been on the Gaza border were forced to move to the West Bank, where there was upheaval, allegedly. That's the story. That's the official story. I mean, you might have some theories about that, but the point is, there's only so many soldiers for the IDF. Right now, they're gearing up for an invasion of Gaza, an event which very well could be the trigger for a broader escalation with Hezbollah and Iranian-backed forces to the north. This is a piece from the Wall Street Journal, how the Israel-Hamas war is tilting the global power balance in favor of Russia and China. And this kind of leads us into the information regarding the petrodollar, because this is certainly something that Russia and China are going to be able to play to their benefit. The U.S., of course, a staunch ally of Israel. We're moving in aircraft carriers to back them up. But this is at the same time that Israel is creating a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, much of the Arab world rallying behind the Palestinian people. And China and Russia are capitalizing on that, and they're using this to increase their diplomatic influence in the region. And we know this was a hotly contested region leading up to this conflict, but this conflict has certainly shifted things in balance, or shifted the balance in favor of Russia and China, as the Wall Street Journal article here says. Remember this? This was this infrastructure package. This is a report from September 9th, so it seems like a real long time ago now. But not too long ago, the G20 meeting was wrapping up, and Biden had cooked up this infrastructure plan through the Middle East, an obvious counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Well, how well is that going to work out now? Obviously, these threats to Chinese influence in the Middle East that the U.S. was trying to counter with this, these plans are now all going to pot and probably don't have a chance of going through. And notably, Saudi Arabia has stated that the deal that the Biden administration was working on to normalize relations with Israel and the Saudis, part of that deal also was to protect the petrodollar and kind of enshrine it, have the Saudis in exchange for, a laundry list of things, Palestinian state, nuclear power plants, with the assistance of the U.S., a new ironclad security guarantee, which, now after what happened in Afghanistan and with what's going on right now, it seems like the U.S. Promise of a security guarantee in the Middle East is becoming a little less reliable. If you ask me, I think that that's a likely outcome of all of this, that U.S. influence in the Middle East will be diminished. And now the Iranian president and MBS have had a phone call to discuss this. They're in conversation, whereas the response that U.S. diplomats have had in the Middle East has been very negative, really. Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, is over, or was over there. He was trying to, rally support in the Arab world for our commitment to Israel. That's not working out too well. This one's from Business Insider. Saudi Crown Prince snubbed the U.S. Secretary of State by making him wait for hours for a meeting before postponing it. So Blinken was told that this meeting was going to be in the evening. MBS shows up the next morning after keeping him waiting for hours. This is not what you do to a diplomat that you want to make progress with. This is how you snub a foreign power and tell them that your allegiances are moving. And of course, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, all of these countries are joining the BRICS organization on January 1st. There was, of course, it's really more that an invite has been extended to them. There was some speculation that, who knows, maybe the Saudis wouldn't do that, but it's looking more and more likely that they're going to accept that invitation, especially following these developments over the past week in the Middle East. The U.S. position here trying to salvage the petrodollar. And to bring you up to speed, if you're new to the channel, you haven't been watching this for too long, you're just kind of getting introduced to Middle East policy and energy. The petrodollar is a system set up back in the 70s by Kissinger and Nixon in 1974, by which Saudi Arabia agrees to only accept dollars for their oil exports. So this has created a tremendous amount of demand for U.S. dollars around the world since that time. OPEC follows the lead of Saudi Arabia, prices all the oil in dollars. Then these petrodollars that are spent purchasing oil from these exporters, they take those profits and they reinvest them into U.S. Treasuries. So it's kind of a win-win for the U.S. in the sense that not only is there greater demand for U.S. dollars because you have to have them to buy oil because of the petrodollar, but also those petrodollar profits get reinvested into U.S. debt. This has kept interest rates low. It has allowed the U.S. to borrow, ungodly sums of money. In fact, we can take a look at that right now. What are we at the U.S. national debt now? $33.562 trillion. The pace of increase does seem to have taken a little bit of a breather. Of course, we moved up $500 billion between September 15th and October 5th. Now, it's been 11 days since then, and we've only gone up another $62 billion. So I guess that's a slow pace of borrowing for us. But one thing that this conflict that is playing out in the Middle East basically guarantees is that the U.S. national debt is going to be going much, much higher, and the deficits are about to accelerate in a very big way. In fact, we just had Janet Yellen coming out and telling us, oh yeah, the U.S. can support Israel and Ukraine in its wars simultaneously. No problem. We can certainly afford to do it, I think is the quote from her. And, to an extent, I suppose she's right. We can always print money and funnel it into foreign conflicts if we deem that to be the correct way to allocate our resources. But I don't know. I mean, can we afford it? We don't have any money, of course. Any money that we do spend on these conflicts will be borrowed, right? So, it all just comes down to how high can we run up our debt. Of course, Janet Yellen famously telling us that we don't need to worry about how high the debt goes. It's only, the cost of servicing it. Of course, interest rates are continuing to move up. Inflation is climbing. The cost to service the debt is now approaching $1 trillion annually, and very soon it will be overtaking both Social Security and Medicare should we remain on the path that we are on as the largest item on the budget. So do me a favor, put a 1 in the chat if you think that we can afford to fund 2 foreign wars. Put a 2 if you think that might not be the best way to allocate our funds. If you're a taxpayer and you don't want to be on the hook for that, put a 2. But yeah, this is not looking good, folks. Where were we? Okay, so Iran, this is from earlier today, says that the U.S. military is already involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And, kind of in a way, we are, to the extent that we're extending military aid to Israel. And also, we have a giant aircraft carrier strike group sitting off the coast. So maybe we haven't fired any munitions yet, but, there's a very credible threat that we could be getting involved in. Iran saying that we are is quite escalatory, but that's not all. Oh, I wanted to come back to this. I guess I have my slides a little out of order here. But just to give you an idea of the incursions that China has been making into the Middle East, it's important to, keep all of this straight. I know we can kind of just get focused on the most current events, but remember, it was just a little under a year ago, 10 months ago in December, that China's president Xi Jinping was visiting Riyadh, the Saudi capital, this Gulf summit where he was petitioning all of these Gulf states here who produce all of this oil. We'll go back to the map here. All of these Gulf states, China is trying to get them to sell their exports in Yuan, which, this conflict is bringing us one step closer to the day when that happens. We've already had the UAE selling natural gas via Total Energy, the French energy company, to Beijing, priced in Yuan. We've seen the UAE sell oil to India, priced in renminbi. These countries are joining the BRICS organization. Doesn't really take a lot to put this together. That probably 2024, the petrodollar system is going to come to an end. Now, a lot of people seem confused that, it's already come to an end. I don't believe it has. I haven't seen any sources that Saudi Arabia is selling their oil for anything other than dollars, but the days are numbered for this system. And if this system does go away, it was important enough to the Biden administration to offer Saudi Arabia nuclear power plants in a Palestinian state to keep this thing running. So that gives you an idea of how important this is. This will be very negative for the dollar. And when that happens, this is something you're going to see moving much higher, the price of silver. Of course, not financial advice. I'm just telling you my thoughts. But the price of both silver, gold, all commodities will likely be going much higher in dollar terms when the petrodollar system comes to an end. And the clock is ticking on that. And this nascent conflict in the Middle East is bringing that day much closer. Now, this is from, Market Watch. Strategists at, BCA Research, it's a Montreal-based think tank, I guess. He's saying that he sees a 70% chance that this Israel-Hamas war will spread beyond Gaza, which will threaten oil, of course. Yeah, that seems highly likely. I think that the threat here is being downplayed a little bit. It's not necessarily in the U.S. best interest right now to have this conflict breaking out because, there's an election next year, so the incumbents don't want sky-high oil prices and inflation to run out of control before then. But that may be, beyond our control at this point. And of course, it's like the U.S., I think the administration, the powers that be, the folks in Washington, they want this conflict going on, but they don't want it to escalate it. They want it to remain, isolated so that they can borrow all of this money from the future, spend it into the now in the terms of military spending, keep this derelict economy that we have going just a little bit longer. But if it does spread, this will be a real problem. And that is why Blinken is going around the Middle East trying to rally support for our backing of Israel, trying to get the rest of the Arab states on board. But that doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Here's another one from CNBC. Iran warns war could expand. China says that the Gaza offensive is beyond self-defense. So this is another example of how China is using this to increase their prestige, their influence in the Arab world that produces all of these fossil fuel energy resources that China wants to lock down for themselves. They're basically saying Israel has exceeded self-defense, and so they need to halt the war in Gaza. Does China really care about Gaza? I don't think so. I think China is largely self-serving in their motives here, but by taking the side of the Arab states and trying to put pressure on Israel to stop the campaign into Gaza and to institute more humanitarian aid, then they're certainly racking up points of influence with the Middle East. And that means that, the Petro Yuan may be around the corner. That's ultimately the agenda here. Biden saying Hamas must be eliminated. Okay, well, that's somewhat escalatory. That is counter to what China is saying. China wants the assault in Gaza, the ground incursion into Gaza, which is likely about to begin, to be called off, whereas Biden saying Hamas must be eliminated. And the U.S. is likely willing to support that mission with an aircraft carrier strike group or two. But of course, you have to understand, the aircraft carrier strike group is not for Hamas. They don't need an aircraft carrier to fight Hamas. Hamas is a relatively easy target for the likes of the IDF on their own. But then this is interesting. Biden says here that he did not think American troops would be necessary on the ground, as Israel has one of the finest fighting forces. The fact that they're even discussing American boots on the ground for this is pretty incredible. Although, there are U.S. soldiers in this theater right now as we speak. They're operating in Syria, which is, right next to the conflict here. You've got Israel, Lebanon, and Syria, and there are U.S. troops stationed in Syria right now. If you recall, again, this is from October 5th. Even this seems like a while ago now because this was before this all kicked off. But on October 5th, the United States, we shot down a Turkish drone, which is, it just goes to show you how weird and complicated everything in the Middle East really is. Turkey is a NATO member, but we shot down their drone. Now, Turkey and the U.S. are kind of at odds in Syria because there are Kurdish groups there that the U.S. backs. But of course, the Turks are no fans of the Kurds. They're always battling. I think there are some Kurds that operate within Turkey that the Turks have been, fighting with for decades. And so it just goes to show you how bizarre things have gotten over in the Middle East, especially with the Syrian civil war, the U.S. backing rebel groups there. It's not good, folks. And this is another thing. We got U.S. officials. Iran might see an opportunity to attack American forces amid Middle East instability. Well, yeah, that's one of the problems with having your troops over in harm's way. It makes it a lot easier for our enemies to get at them. They don't need to come to the U.S. to dish out any damage because our troops are right there. And I've had a few people leave comments to the extent of the fact that the aircraft carriers are a big, juicy target sitting out there. And I mean, you can imagine what a debacle that would be if an aircraft carrier was damaged or destroyed. And it makes it much easier for that to happen by having it out in the Eastern Mediterranean. I mean, does Iran or Hezbollah have the capability to damage a U.S. aircraft carrier? Well, it's probably better to not find out. But we might, get an idea of their capabilities here in the near future. And, that would be the defining event that could kick off a much bigger war. And I think, the Fed and the powers that be, they're always looking for a good crisis to capitalize on. I think the Fed would like a cover to begin running the printing presses again because they understand the risk of a massive credit lockup here in the U.S. and a liquidity crisis, which, despite the fact that everybody's looking at the Middle East right now, there's still a huge problem in the U.S. economy, and we were seeing a massive debt sell-off prior to this occurring, which has taken a little bit of a breather, but 10-year yield rising again today, so, that might be rearing its ugly head. And so, in some ways, we kind of need a conflict over there, but a conflict will be very ugly indeed. One of the big deals is that it likely will lead to much, much higher inflation and energy prices. Part of the reason is, this is why we've got the map up here. So you've got the geography here: Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, all of these major fossil fuel producing nations right here on the map. And then this right here, this is the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is a place where a tremendous amount of the world's oil flows. I've got the Wikipedia article for it pulled up right here. And according to the latest numbers, if I can find the oil trade flow, here we go. In 2018 alone, 21 million barrels a day were passing through the Strait of Hormuz. That's about 20% of world oil consumption on a daily basis. I think we consume something like 100 million barrels of oil per day globally, so 21 million barrels is a huge amount. It's oil from all of these countries that surround this: Iran, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Iraq, all of these, the UAE, all these major fossil fuel producers. And so, it's not it wouldn't be the first time that this area has proven to be a problem. I mean, there's a long history. If you remember back in 2008, there was this U.S.-Iranian naval dispute where the Iranians were threatening to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Then in 2011, we had sanctions going on Iran, and they threatened to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, if they do that, you will see oil rapidly rise to, I don't know, $150 a barrel, $200 a barrel. It won't even be within the power of other OPEC nations to increase supply because the Saudis can pump the oil out of the ground, but if it can't make it through the Strait of Hormuz, it doesn't matter. It won't make it to global markets. Also, Iran, we had Senator Lindsey Graham talking about attacking their oil infrastructure. They alone produce something like 2.2 million barrels of oil per day that they export largely to China. So there are so many factors here that could lead to a massive spike up in the price of energy. And of course, if we see that, the recession, the economic crisis that we've been kind of skirting around and avoiding will kick in right away because, we can't sustain super high inflation in this country. If you see inflation go to, say, I don't know, 5-10% because of increased energy prices. I mean, if you thought the Putin price hike, they like to call it that, was bad in 2022, just wait until you see the Iran price hike. That's going to be a really big deal. And, if inflation shoots out, that means rates will continue to move up because, of course, folks holding debt, they don't want to be losing money in real terms, so they're going to need higher rates to compensate them. You've got banks in the U.S. which really cannot sustain higher rates. So really what we're on track for here is either a massive credit lockup or runaway inflation. And that doesn't necessarily mean hyperinflation, but it could mean sustained high inflation. If we have 10% inflation for several years in a row, remember, inflation is cumulative, and that wouldn't be technically a hyperinflation, but it would be a horrible economic situation in the U.S., and it would be one in which you would absolutely want some of this stuff. Silver, which the fact that silver is still trading at $22.74 in light of all of this, I think is pretty incredible. But again, I'm buying gold and silver right now, whether the price goes up, down, or sideways, because I think that end game here is either a massive credit lockup followed by significant inflation or just significant inflation. There's no way that we're going to get into a bigger war and have the, money supply, the debt, the inflation not increase. All right, so this is another piece of news here. The Iraqi Prime Minister confirms Iraq support for the courage of civilians in Gaza. Again, this is just this is from today. This is another example of how the Arab world here is kind of rallying behind the Palestinians, and this gives an opportunity for China and Russia to curry a lot of favor with them. Bad for the U.S., absolutely. What else we got? China and Russia, according to The Guardian, hardened positions on Gaza as war stirs geopolitical tensions. Yeah, in both of these countries, they are utilizing this situation to enhance their own influence in the region. Again, that means Petrodollar is likely going to go buy. Now, finally, don't forget this report from a bipartisan committee in Congress saying that the U.S. must be ready for simultaneous wars with China and Russia. So, Yellen was telling us that we can support wars in Israel and Ukraine. I guess you might as well just add the world's other major military powers to that list as well. And I mean, this is obviously, ridiculous. There's no way that the U.S. can sustain a war against China, Russia, let's say North Korea too, their ally, Israel, and, fighting in Ukraine. I mean, I guess Ukraine and Russia are kind of the same thing there, but there's just no way that we can afford this. We're broke. We already have $33.5 trillion in debt. We've got massive deficits, and this is ostensibly in peacetime. But just think about, if this situation really devolves, you've got Congress like this fantasyland, magical thinking, clown world economics thinking that we can afford all of these wars. We can't even afford the wars that we're already in. That's why we're borrowing the money to conduct them. And to the extent that that increases, it might actually mean a temporary reprieve for the U.S. economy because a huge amount of money will be borrowed and spent into the now. But you have to keep in mind that the longer the powers that be kick the can down the road, the longer they put off this day of reckoning, the worse the collapse will ultimately be. And I mean, it's already so bad in terms of our inability to pay the debt. We've got unfunded liabilities to the tune of $195 trillion. There's no way any of this stuff can be paid except with devalued currency. But if a war breaks out, it's just going to mean even more inflation, more devaluing of the currency. And the problem is, that the U.S. ability to borrow has been backed up by mechanics like the petrodollar system for decades now. And as things are changing, I think that a lot of people just don't understand how this will fundamentally change the dynamics of the global economy. And the U.S. isn't going to be living high on the hog anymore, exporting all of our inflation around and living off debt because, there comes a point when no one's going to lend money to you anymore. Rates go through the roof, and you either get a default and a credit lockup or you get devalued currency because the only way that they can borrow the money is to have the Fed print it up and buy the treasuries and drive yields down. And, when is that going to happen? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't give you a date. But when I see what's happening in the Middle East and around the world, and I hear what our leaders are telling us, that we have to be ready to support a three-front global war, that we have to be ready to funnel tons of money into these conflicts that I don't have a real rosy outlook for the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar. We can go to some questions now. I said that I'd be doing that on the live streams. I've kind of been I've been reading the chat a little bit here, but largely I've just been going on my rant. But if you have anything you'd like me to address, feel free to put it in the chat. Appreciate everybody tuning in today. Make sure you smash that like button. Do me a favor. When we're doing it from a desktop like this, I can't actually see how many likes we've got, but I'm sure there's plenty of them. So thank you all so much for tuning in. But if there's nothing in the chat, we can wrap this up. Let's see, I'm reading back through a few of the comments here. Soon as digital starts, they know everything you do, where you are, and where you buy. Sounds like any country you know. Yeah, I'm assuming you're referring to a CBDC, and yeah, that's not going to be good. The CBDC will be used to control all aspects of the economy and to track everything, micro taxation, all that stuff. Let's see. I wonder how accurate the debt clock is. It looks like a 5-year-old designed it. Yeah, the debt clock is accurate. I've got it pulled up here. You can also, if you, I don't have it pulled up right now, but you can Google the Treasury Debt to the Penny website, and that will confirm that the U.S. national debt is correct. They update the national debt on that Treasury website on a daily basis. Let's see, what else we got here? The Great Reset agenda. Oh, no, you Joe Potter, you made me say those words on this live stream. Well, algorithm, sorry about that. I was just reading a chat. That agenda 2030 plan in Congress. Yeah, 2030 does seem to be a particularly interesting year for all of these individuals. Everybody seems to have a plan in line for 2030, and for a lot of us, the plans don't look particularly good. All right, well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. I will be back tomorrow with another live stream. I'll do my best to hop on here and talk to each and every one of you. Really appreciate everybody who supports the channel. Thank you all so much. Stay safe, get prepared, and happy stacking, and I will catch you next